Okay. Welcome everyone to day 3 of our conference, NAVROC, North American Virtual Reference Online Conference. Today is our final day of the conference. It's been 3 fun-filled days, half days of very informative sessions from just the greatest of colleagues across the US and Canada. And I appreciate everyone for sharing their expertise with us. NAVROC has been going steady since 2019, every other year. So we are excited to have another NAVROC in the books and look for another one in 2027. The planning committee for this year's conference is Caitlin Kenny with Western New York Library Library Resources Council in Amherst, New York. Kelly Doty with Tampa Bay Library Consortium in Tampa, Florida. Ginsley Mondesir with Scholars Portal at the University of Toronto, Ontario. Sarah Pitte with Washington State Library in Tumwater, Washington. Missy Williams with Delaware Division of Libraries. Offices are in Dover, Delaware. And Kristen Polly with British Columbia Electronic Library Network in Burnaby, British Columbia. And myself, Carla Fall with Minitex in the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I'm going to hand things over to Missy now, and she will give you a quick introduction to our first session of the day. Take it over, Missy.
Thank you, Carla. Yes, we've had some amazing sessions this past couple of days, and we're excited to just put another one in the books, as Carla mentioned. And as she did say, I'm Missy Williams. I'm the statewide coordinator for Ask a Librarian Delaware, and I'm the moderator for this session, Lessons in Crisis Management for a Library Occupation. And as you've noticed, your video and audio are turned off for this session. And when you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section, and we're going to hold the questions until the end of the presentation so that Joan will have time to answer those. But please feel free to use the chat feature throughout, and thank you again for joining us. The session is recorded, and we'll have it available on our NAVROC website sometime next week or when we get it all together. So our presenter, welcome Joan. Joan Pettit is the Manager of Reference Services and Library Technologies at Portland State University. She holds an MS, LS, and a BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and an MA in English from Western Carolina University. Thank you again for joining us, Joan, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good day to you, depending on where you are. So I'm going to be talking about, I think, what was the worst week of my professional life. So sorry for the buzzkill and to bring the mood down from what's been a great conference. In spring of 2024, over about a week, during a national student protest movement, protesters at Portland State University gathered outside the library and then on the library portico, and then eventually broke into and occupied the library on my campus. They were there for about 3.5 days, barricading themselves in and police out. The city of Portland and Portland State University both have a long and robust history of protest, including months of protests in the summer of 2020. So the protests on campus weren't surprising at all. What was surprising was the occupation of the library and the ensuing damage. And there's so much that to say about what happened in the library, why, what could we have done differently? And what I really am going to focus on today is like some of the lessons that we feel like we learned, not all of which would mean that nothing like this could ever happen again. But the next thing I'm going to do is share a few photos of the inside of the library. And I just want to say that I was in preparing for this session, I was a little bit hesitant about whether or not to share photos because there's a lot of graffiti and the language is politically charged, and maybe some things that some people agree with, and there's other language in it that people might find either personally offensive or offensive to others. But what I want to try to do is communicate some of the scale of what happened in our building, but also give you a warning that I didn't go through and try to block out or fuzz out anything like that. So anyway, here is, let's see. So this is the outside of our library building. This is what the protesters did to basically try to barricade themselves in. You can see there's like fencing, banners, there's dumpsters they brought up. And this, I've credited the photos here. So those are some of the letters you're seeing are just where the photos are from. This is the inside of our library building. You can see a lot of like construction debris and pallets, and like road materials were brought in the building. This is our entryway to the building, kind of just inside. That's our circulation desk. It's sort of the middle opposite side of that building. You can see there were banners hung. Those wooden chairs, there aren't actually any of those on the first floor of our library. Typically, they were brought from other places. Right in front of at the front of the photo or the bottom, those are our turnstiles. They were all cracked and broken. Again, it's kind of, the mess is hard to see what's going on here. But again, this is just part of like the barricades that the protesters constructed. This is right near the entrance and our circulation desk. And then this is another spot on the first floor. So almost every surface in our building had extensive graffiti on it, including surfaces made of like wood and brick and concrete that was not actually, we ended up, the contract or the construction folks ended up like, actually we had to like throw out or just completely remove some of the doors from this area because they couldn't get all the graffiti out. And then also here's, one of my colleagues describes what the protesters did in the building is like they home aloned it. They pulled chairs and tables from all over the building and put them in places to try to make entry difficult, right? Like they were sort of anticipating a police arrival. So this is the stairs and how they kind of blocked some of the stairways off. Okay, so, and this is just to give you a rough timeline of when things happened. But basically, just some other damage that happened real quick. The fire drills or fire doors were drilled into and blocked off. The fire system was ripped out on multiple floors. We understand that the sprinklers actually would have worked, but the alarm, we think the alarm went off and they were trying to silence it. Computers and printers, other tech, internal and exterior glass was broken. The displays were smashed, right? Like our special collections displays were smashed. The special collections and university archives reading room area, which is on our main floor, was particularly trashed. The fire marshal declared the building uninhabitable. It was a hard hat area. So the library was closed on Monday, April 29th, the university, with all the students sort of camping outside, protesters, they weren't all students, but with the students outside the building over the weekend on Monday, April 29th, the building was just closed per the university's instructions. And then it was Thursday, May 2nd in the morning that the Portland police swept through. So on Monday, May 6th, we were able to open up a temporary reference service point with no circulation or reserves. And then on Wednesday, May 29th, we opened a pop-up library. So that means for a month, we had no circulation, no physical reserves, and only just basically a reference desk and chat reference. That was like our only way, except for email, of course, of interacting with our users. And then the library reopened to all users Monday, September 16th. So we were closed for almost 5 months with those repairs going on. One of my colleagues estimates that a third of the furniture in our public areas was damaged and had to be discarded. Many doors and carpets were replaced. New technology was installed. We still haven't replaced all the furniture, and the university has estimated over $1.2 million of damages in the building. The scale of what the protesters did in the building to the physical building is really kind of hard to sort of understand if you didn't see it for yourself. And also, the main books in our stacks were hardly damaged. Some things were moved around. It was clear that students were reading some of the books, protesters. But the collections were largely, with some exceptions, the collections were largely intact. Okay, so that's kind of to give you an idea of what happened. It wasn't covered very much in national news, unlike some of the protests that were happening elsewhere. So I want to focus now on lessons learned, working with campus partners, internal communication, external communication, emergency preparedness, and the trauma of this all. And also want to mention that many of my colleagues at Portland State would probably disagree with, we all had very different opinions and experiences about what happened and what we could have done. But many of the ideas that I'm sharing in the lessons learned also came in generation with my colleagues, especially the other library managers and Rose Bosley, who's the manager of access services. Okay. So I know, what a big, strange thing to go from talking about that to saying, and here are the lessons we learned. In the immediate aftermath, it was really hard for us not to be helping students. Unlike during the early days of the pandemic, when all of campus was closed and the students and faculty were off, but we still had access to the library and our collections, we had no easy and regular access to the library building. And we were really dependent on other people to help us. And, we're used to being the helpers, right? We're used to being the ones who are sort of propping up everybody else. Some of our biggest partners were the Office of Information Technology. They set up a help desk for us. They were just incredibly supportive people. The folks who run our student union, like the building managers, those aren't people that we really had an established relationship and didn't even really know. They basically gave us some space to set up a temporary library and gave us some space to store returned items, right? Because we didn't even have book trucks or the keys to I think we did have the key to the outside book drop, but we didn't even have book trucks or anywhere to store the books that were piling up. So we didn't even have ways for students who were about to graduate to return their books. We worked a lot with capital projects and construction. And yeah, so one of the things I have that was really hard for us is that we really needed help from campus, and we really had to not just accept the help that was offered, but go out and offer it to other people. In terms of internal communications, this was actually something that I think we did really well. We had so many meetings when this was happening. Early on, I think it was, during the week of the occupation, I happened to attend like one of the leadership sessions on campus. We have like a leadership consultant, and sort of said to her, how should we be handling this as managers? And she said to me, you all need to just commit to transparency and to just sharing everything you know about what's going on. And so as a management group, we did that. There was so much employee stress. There was misinformation in the news. it was so politically charged that it was really a complicated place for us to be in the middle of this. So then we had daily Zoom meetings with management team for while this occupation was happening and for the first 2 weeks afterwards. And then we also had daily Zoom meetings with library employees, which seems like a lot, but when this is going on, there's just so much shock. It's not like you're getting all your regular work done from home anyway. Some of the biggest challenges we had was just not knowing what was going on. The university was really we lost, we think that we run the library until something like this happens. And, once the fire marshal declares your building uninhabitable, it turns out that we're not actually in charge of the library. Our dean would send us constant updates about the repairs and timelines and things like that. So this is something where I think just sharing all the information we had, even though sometimes it turned out to be wrong or it would change, was something that we did really well. And I just don't think I can emphasize enough how, I think there were some people who just wanted to give out information in dribs and drabs, or there was a sense of, well, we shouldn't overwhelm people. But I think it was just so much better to just give all the information out to everyone in the library, what we had. External communication was a much bigger challenge for us. When this happened, we were we had just hired a new dean who hadn't started yet. And so we had interim leadership who was dedicated and competent, but also already really tired from COVID. And we did not have a robust communication setup. We didn't have a lot of people doing social media updates or things like that. So we never were sure of what the messages should be to our users and how much we needed to go through university communications. The other thing that was really hard is that some of my colleagues, you all know that during times of stress, we can spend a lot of time on social media. And so some of the misinformation that was popping up, or some of the rumors on, for example, the social media accounts of the student paper and things like that. A lot of that was really stressful for some people in the library, and we really had an inclination to try to correct misinformation as much as possible. The worst piece of information that got out early was when a local newspaper was in the building with police before we had been back in the building, and didn't understand what they were seeing, and said there was a collection that we had recently moved. So there were a bunch of empty shelves. And so they said that collection was stolen when really it had just been moved. And we still hear that misinformation coming up. So we kind of just had to stop trying to correct it all, which is really hard when you're a librarian. The misinformation is about you. We put a link and a banner on our homepage. Some of our best partners were other area libraries in the Orbis Cascade Alliance. We sent our students out to borrow books through them. But yeah, this was a really big challenge, and something we didn't really, I'd say something that we could have, yeah, this is a really hard part of something like this. Another thing that was really difficult was the communication directed at us. So a lot of folks who worked in the library, whether on reference or just emails or phone calls, we got so much help and emotional dumping, basically from, especially actually I should say from faculty, sometimes from students, and lots of offers of help that we couldn't use. We had so many people contacting us to offer to help clean up in the building, which we didn't even have access to the building. It was a hard hat area. And we had a lot of people who were coming up to the service desk in our temporary location and wanted to talk to us about what had happened. And even as somebody who has, I've worked in retail a lot, I've worked in libraries for a long time, at service desks a lot. I'm pretty comfortable at difficult or awkward patron interactions, but this was really hard. It was really hard when people would come up and kind of rant about the protesters or rant about the university's response or give us their take on what happened while we're basically at a service desk. So this actually still continues to happen too. Okay, so emergency preparedness, it turns out, is not just for natural disasters. So some of the things we have been thinking about in our library is what should we be doing, not just for a potential occupation, right? Because the next thing that happens is never going to be exactly the same as the last one. Do you know, for example, what your library's emergency plan is and where to get it? Because I didn't know that before, and I don't even think any of us looked at it. Is it regularly updated? Who do you contact on campus to ask for help if you lose access to your workplaces? What are your options if you lose access to your physical collection? Who communicates necessary information to patrons, to the media? Who decides the tone and content of your public messaging? Who can you delegate to in your organization? I think this was a really big one because so much was being directed at our dean. And then our associate dean, who's also the head of special collections, had so much going on dealing with what had happened in special collections and some of the misinformation that you really have to, in a situation like this, get as many of your people in your organization that you trust doing as many things as possible, even if those are usually things that somebody higher up would do. So basically it fell to, actually I would say, the head of access services and I went to our dean and basically said, can we work with campus to set up a temporary library, right? So that's not something that the head of reference and the head of access services would not usually be working with like space people on campus to set up new space on campus. And then one of the big questions is, what resources do you have available to support employees through a traumatic experience? That is not something we had any planning for in our emergency preparedness documents. We've also started to develop some unexpected closure procedures for access services, special collections, for reference. What if you need to close your library on very short notice? Do you have step-by-step instructions for closing the building available to people who might not usually be the closers? Can essential keys be locked away or removed from the building? We had some keys that weren't all locked up in a safe that in retrospect we wished we had taken out. Are there high priority spaces or items that can be further secured? For example, if you have some locked exhibits of special collections or archives materials, if you are not in the building, are those things where the glass could just be smashed and those items damaged? Are there materials or supplies staff can bring home? And can staff take home meaningful personal items? The amount of stress we all had over our houseplants in our offices was probably one of the biggest ways we channeled our stress. We worried a lot about our plants and if they were getting watered. But we had some staff offices that were broken into and people who had things go missing, like their favorite sweater that they keep on their desk. Things like that became really unsettling and difficult for people as we were going through this process. And so that leads into this last section I have to talk about. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I think that throughout this process, we were not using words like trauma. One of the things that was really hard on campus was that this was so politically charged that a lot of people were feeling it. A lot of us were feeling like we were physically fine. Nobody had been in, none of the library folks had been in the building when this happened. The things, our personal items that were damaged and missing were, like, as I said, like not things of real material value. But the chaos and upheaval at your workplace can really affect your emotional well-being. And it was very easy for us to be dismissive, I think, of our own feelings, in particular as managers or supervisors, right? Everyone reacts differently. Some people were really leaning in and wanting to connect with coworkers, and other people really didn't want to see any pictures from inside the building and were really upset at the idea of going into the building until it was completely repainted and reset. And you just can't predict who's going to be who. And some small things can be really upsetting. Dealing with this isn't linear. We had some of the hardest times were when we thought we were going to be able to get back in and then we couldn't. There was a huge like plywood fence around the building during the repairs. When that fence came down, a lot of us had a lot of stress dealing with that moment. I think because it was really scary, like we were worried that people were going to come back into the building. And so one of the big things that we didn't do, and one of the biggest lessons, right? So right after the library occupation and when the building was still closed, Human Resources reached out to the dean of the library and offered us a debrief session. We didn't know what that was. We were all such a mess that we didn't know what they were offering and what that would do for us. And it wasn't until a few months later that we reached out to HR again and said, hey, we think we want to do those debrief sessions. These are usually things that happen like right away after a traumatic event. And so we had one for library staff who were interested, and then we had one for library managers. And it would have been a lot better. What I have told campus, and I think what they understand now, is if they had just said to us, we are going to organize some debrief sessions for you and your staff. Especially for the library folks who were in and out of the building a lot, like getting technology, our circulation folks, walking through the library on a weekly or a couple times a week basis and sort of seeing all the graffiti and all the work was really difficult. And in that debrief session, the counselor who came and talked to us gave us these handouts about civil unrest in the workplace and dealing with that. And when I saw this handout, it was like I had immediately understood what I had seen in myself and my colleagues and the folks who work for me all summer long. And it's really weird to talk about like feelings in your Zoom meeting at work, in your staff meeting, and that may not be the appropriate way, right? Like we are not experts. So actually having folks who are counselors and therapists who do things like this come in and talk to us about this, it would have been better for us to be doing that a lot sooner, both for ourselves and for our coworkers and colleagues. So if HR calls and says, we think you should do this thing, go ahead and do that. So that was one of the biggest lessons for me. So I want to share with you all that some good places to get more photos and information about what happened is the student paper, the Portland State Vanguard. OPB is our local public media here in Oregon, and they had extensive and excellent coverage. Oregon Live is the website for the Oregonian, our Portland-based paper. They were some of the people who spread the misinformation, who were in the building earliest. But they do have some really good photos so you can see. I know I've covered a lot now, but I want to finish there and open it up to any questions you may have.
Wow.
I know it's a
Thank you,
lot. It's so
Joan.
much. I know, right?
It's so devastating. I'm so heartbroken for you all. And it's just to hear it again. I know I was kind of prepared because we knew what your session was going to be about, but wow. So we do have a couple of questions or more questions coming in now. So the first one, and I think this is a great question. Any idea why the library was the chosen location? Was it, and what is it, the only building that was occupied on campus?
Yeah, I think that is such a good question. Okay, so we are a urban campus, and the library is, I mean, my take on it is that it is perhaps because the students feel so comfortable with the library that they were, well, so where they were originally like camping was right outside the library building, and then it started to rain because it's Portland and it was April. And so the library has this large, like curved area and kind of a covered portico. So they basically came up onto the porch, and I was on the reference desk when the students, like, and I could see when the students or the protesters started moving up onto the library portico to, I think, just to get out of the rain. And I remember thinking, isn't it nice that they feel like the library is a comfortable and welcoming space for them? And then over several days, like if you all saw any of the photos of the encampments on different campuses, or if there were any on in your area from last spring, these were like large tented encampments that grew and grew and grew. We are basically on City of Portland property, and the city was not letting them camp, right? Like it's campus and city are sort of intermingled in our urban area. And the city was not letting them stay in what we call the park blocks, which is city property. So in order for them to sort of be on campus, they had to be like right next to a building. And they were getting really big. There was a lot of interaction with campus public safety that we were not a part of, a lot of going back and forth with the president's office. But whether you want to, and they were basically given, they were told that they needed to leave, or the campus public safety was going to come and sweep them out. So whether they backed themselves into a corner or were pushed into a corner, painted into a corner, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't think they weren't protesting the library. They were protesting the same things that students across the country were protesting last April and May. And I think they came into the building because the building was right there. I mean, one of my colleagues has said maybe because we don't have a lot of entrances to the building, a lot of public entrances, only one, like a public library. But it wasn't about the library. And I think one of the parts that was really hard for us to see was that I think you'll notice I keep going back and forth between saying the students and the protesters. There were a lot of students who were protesting, but there were a lot of people who weren't students. I mean, we don't really know. There were hundreds of people in the building. But I think a lot of them really thought that being in the library, it was like that they were even expanding the reach of the library, right? That they were, because it was still like they were saying it was still open. Students could come in and study. And I think that they just, you know, lots of people think they can be librarians, right? And yeah, so it wasn't, I think it was because of our space and our location. And it wasn't, they weren't protesting the library, to be clear. It was just that we were a convenient location for this. And I think that was kind of the thing that was really hard, is because we feel like we are the ones who are here for you. We also don't know what would have happened if campus had decided that the library didn't have to close that day. Like if we had had people working in the building and the doors hadn't been locked, could it have ended up being sort of a sit-in situation or like a quiet protest kind of situation, as opposed to, I think a lot of the damage and a lot of the graffiti, all I tell you, almost every single wall, like, or surface, whether concrete, brick, paint, was just covered in graffiti. So, and we think that a lot of the worst things happened like right away in maybe that first couple hours. One of my colleagues was in the building, or went into the building because she was really worried about it. And I think a lot of the chaos and a lot of the damage happened kind of right at first, right when they sort of built up to doing this. I don't know. So that's a long way of saying I don't know the answer to that. And it's a really good question.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Wow. So Ariel says, I'm really sorry you all went through this. Did you feel empowered to push back on emotional dumping patrons were engaging in?
Thank you for asking that, because one thing that I forgot to share is that my colleague in Access Services, Rose, and I developed some scripts, right, that folks could use. And I think what I will say is that whether or not we felt like people could push back depended a lot on, I think, just those people's comfort with sort of assertiveness and just general customer service orientation, right? Like sometimes you have people who are rude to you when you're at a service desk. And actually, I'll say it's especially, I feel like in libraries, it's been my experience, unfortunately, that people are more likely to be rude and pushy with like people at circulation versus people who are librarians. Um, we gave people some scripts to just kind of, things that we could say to sort of deflect or refer them to the dean. So we did give them some scripts to do that. Some people felt really uncomfortable doing that. There were a couple situations in our pop-up library where somebody would start talking to one of our students or the circulation workers, and I would sort of pull them over to me to talk. I mean, I felt comfortable doing that, but I think I don't know. Look, I don't want to we have this thing in Portland called Portland Nice, and some people just have a really hard time sort of like kind of asserting themselves back to people, especially in customer service situations. I was okay doing that, but like I had somebody come up to me, a faculty member who I hadn't seen in a while at the reference desk just 2 weeks ago, and sort of started talking about the occupation and how terrible it was. And one of the most awkward places that we found ourselves in, I think, is that people's feeling about the occupation seem to mimic their feelings about the political issue. So if they were supportive of the political issue, a lot of times they would come and say, well, it was students who were in the building and they really did a lot of work to protect the collections. There was hardly anything damaged. And they had this narrative that there were only like 1 or 2 computers that were broken, that the students really protected the building, and that it was like a righteous thing to have happened. They had a lot of support in the community and from, I'd say, and from local activists. And then people who didn't like the protests would say those weren't students in the building, they were outside agitators and they rampaged through and destroyed everything. Neither of those things was true, and it was really hard for us to be in the middle of that, knowing that everybody was wrong. There were students in the building who were leading this occupation. I know that because some of them reached out to us afterwards to say, I need some of my stuff that got left out. And also, one thing I didn't talk a lot about was police swept the students out, Portland police. And in Portland, protest movement have a very difficult relationship with our local police. I'm sure some of you all can guess at some of the things I'm talking about. So it was really hard for us to see live on the news, on news streams, police basically sweeping people out of the building, and then actually that day, then there was a huge protest and police interactions on campus. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I think some of us felt comfortable pushing back, but other people didn't. And that was part of sort of the stress of a lot of this.
All right. Thank you. We have quite a few more questions coming in. So let's see.
Okay, I'll keep my answer shorter.
Okay. Did a lot of people retire, quit, leave because of this event, or did people find a way to come together and support each other?
That is a good question. We had some retirements. We had a retirement that was already planned. Have we had? It's hard to say why certain people have left. I mean, no, we have a staff, I think, of about 60 or so. We've had a couple people leave. Is it a contributing factor? I mean, probably. It's kind of hard to tease that apart.
So we've had a couple questions. I'm going to kind of try to combine these two. They're wondering how you had to deploy more library staff on chat or email reference during your closure period, and if so, how you managed training them in a short period of time, kind of like we did during COVID. And then, and they were asking, another one was asking if you could talk more about how virtual chat and reference worked during that time and how it was different than regular times.
Yeah, so basically, folks who normally would have been working at the reference desk went on chat. At the time, the way we were doing staffing was that we had folks mostly on the desk with some chat backup during busy times. So then those folks just all went on to chat. I think we were able to keep up with the volume. I think one of the biggest parts that was really difficult was that we couldn't help people a lot of the times, right? So our entire campus was closed, I think, for a full week of classes, maybe for 4 days, but for 4 or 5 days, all classes were canceled, and students were asking us for reserve items, and we couldn't even do local interlibrary loan anymore, except for electronic items. We could do, of course, regular interlibrary loan for electronic stuff, but we couldn't. We're part of a consortium where we do a lot of book sharing back and forth, and we couldn't do that. We also had so many books still to be returned to our other partners. One of the partners I didn't even mention who helped us was like the mail office on campus had tons of our mail that just sat there for months, including interlibrary loan books that for a while we had no way to get to people. So we also got, during the occupation, we got a couple questions from the police asking us, like, they were trying to find phone numbers for different parts of the library because they wanted to talk to protesters, and they were hoping if they could call different phone numbers, maybe somebody would answer. So some of the ways it was different was that basically we couldn't help people in a lot of the ways, right? And I think that was the biggest challenge. We didn't have to do any short notice training. One of the things that was good about our temporary pop-up library, it was the first time we had an integrated service area between circulation and reference, and that was really helpful. So basically, we were just sort of staffed up more than usual because there were more of us. I checked out a couple books, which, like, that's kind of fun for me to do as somebody who's not usually behind circulation. Yeah, so we didn't really have to do any short-term training. We had people who were already trained on our chat reference service.
I'm sure the volume increased during that time because they couldn't reach you any other way.
That's right. And then lots of the subject librarians, of course, got emails. And I'm just jumping ahead and seeing there's a question about furloughs or layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that no, we didn't, nobody was furloughed or laid off. I mean, there were staff who couldn't do their normal jobs in the same way. But we had some projects that we had done of, like, transcribing special collections, things for our students who would normally have been working in the building. So no, we didn't do any furloughs or layoffs like that. It's also we're a mostly unionized campus, and that we just weren't. I mean, we still had our regular budget to pay people, right? Because it's not like when the library is closed, you're not making money. We're not making money when we're open either. So our budget situation didn't really change as a result of that. Most of our people are regular staff, and so we tried to find ways for people to stay busy. I think some of the people who had the most to do were probably ones who were sort of like working through it and processing it the most. I was really busy, and I was kind of glad to be busy.
Okay. Let's see. There's, gosh, so many. What was the effect on your student workers in the library?
Yeah, I mean, they would have, yeah, we tried to get them back and working in our pop-up library as quickly as possible. we gave them these, yeah, like I said, these transcription projects from special collections, and they were glad to have the work. It was also, so we're on the quarter system. Our term goes through mid-June. So for the students who were working for us through mid-June, they continued to have work available. It's just that they were doing some of these other projects, and a lot of our students who work in circulation would rather not be sitting at a computer doing work from home. They would have liked to have been working on campus. When they were able to come back to campus and work for us, they were glad to be doing that. Many of our students, though, wouldn't normally be working over the summer. And so, so we have fewer students working, but that's typical anyway. Yeah, so they were, I mean, I think it was even more complicated for them because when this was all happening, they were going to their classes and hearing some of their classmates have conversations about what had happened in the library. But we continued to employ them, which had been what we did early in the pandemic, even when there wasn't really the typical work for them.
And relating to students again, what protections does your library and university have for students and employees who express their opinions on this issue,
I mean,
if any, I guess?
yeah, I have tenure. So many of our students though and staff don't. I mean, I guess what protections do we have? I mean, so we've had some of the, okay, so across the country, the content of the protests have been incredibly controversial, with people having very strong opinions. I don't know that anybody on our campus has suffered consequences as a result of things that they have said. What protections we have, I mean, I guess for many of us, I'm not, because I'm a manager, I'm not represented by the union, but most of our faculty and staff are in a union, so they'd have a protection that way. I mean, I would say the same protections that sort of exist and don't exist on any campus, that these things have become really politically charged. The Department of Education, after the inauguration, started an investigation into 5 campuses for anti-Semitism, and we're one of the campuses that's getting that investigation. And that is I don't know what that investigation is going to mean. This has been a really difficult issue on campus for people who have strong feelings about the political issues. I don't know. I'm trying to stay away from the political issues, but I
Right.
mean, yeah, it's
But
just,
it
it's
was.
a really tough situation, like it always is with politically charged issues.
Okay, well, we have about 5 minutes, so I would be curious about this. What does the new space look like after they repaired it?
It looks a lot like the old space, but just kind of empty with a lot less furniture. We are still working on figuring out. So a lot of the damaged furniture was like those old wooden library tables and chairs, and we've decided to sort of consolidate and rearrange. So insurance money is going to pay, I think maybe like we have $400,000 or so to spend on new furniture. So it is an opportunity for us. It looks sparse though, if you are somebody who, somebody is asking where the money came from. This was covered by insurance. So I don't know what kind of insurance the university has, but the insurance covered all or most of this. I don't know. I don't know, if there's some expenses that weren't covered. But the space, if you know where to look, you can see some spaces, for example, where the brick looks a little different because of the way it was power washed or ground down. But it was, the building is freshly painted. It's like that on the inside.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think a couple of people put in similar questions about were charges brought against these people and were held accountable, and are there any updates about that?
Yeah, and I can, yes. So there were maybe 20, 25 arrests, something like that. When the police flushed out the building, they went up the fire exit stairs and then started from the top. And it seemed to us as observers that they were trying to give people a chance to they gave them a lot of warnings in advance, not specifically of that action. It seemed to us like they were trying to give people a chance to get out of the building and not get arrested. There is a lot of distrust in police in this town, and it is not undeserved. So I don't think that they were, the protester had made these barricades and like put soap on the floor and were really doing all these things to try to make it difficult for police to come in. There were charges brought against some students had plea deals, I think, or some protesters. But most of the charges, like there have not been a lot of people who have been arrested and then like charged and had consequences. Maybe what I'll do is add a few links to stories. I'll add some links specifically to information about protesters before I upload to Sketch, so that you all can read and follow up on it. But no, there weren't a lot of arrests and things like that.
All right, trying to do this quickly, but I've captured the questions so that we can forward them to you, and then maybe we can have you answer them and put them up on our website too with this present when we upload the recordings. The couple of ones were about staff safety plan now. Is this part of the college's policies, and any new ideas, initiatives for training that would be beneficial for handling these type of situations, any crisis situations?
I mean, I think this is something we're still talking about internally. I think that the HR stuff and encouraging HR to be more assertive and getting debriefs to people, but that's not really, I mean, what lessons have been learned at upper level administrations? I couldn't tell you. Do we have lessons as a library? I mean, I don't know. I think we're still figuring that out.
Great. And you mentioned that some of your colleagues had disagreed with you. What types of things did they disagree with you on?
Okay, so some folks in the library are very supportive and agreed a lot with the aims of the protesters, even if they weren't super happy about them being in the building. Some people, I tend to think that maybe if we as a library had been interacting with the protesters more as they set up right outside the building as librarians, maybe that would have made a difference in some of the, but because campus, right, like campus public safety, that's the campus police, and the administration was taking a lead in that, and we weren't like we weren't going outside as librarians and interacting with the protesters who were set up outside the building. It was kind of intimidating for a lot of our staff. It was really stressful for a lot of our staff walking in and out of the building for a few days while the protesters were camped right there. Some people remained really scared of them and felt like they were in danger. Other people felt like they weren't actually in danger. I mean, there were just yeah, so people just had a range of feelings and responses.
Sure. All right. Well, like I said, I have the questions captured so that if you wanted to answer them in more depth, then perhaps we can add that onto the website when we have everything uploaded. So thank you so much for sharing this. I mean, wow, what an experience that we don't wish on anyone, right? And it seemed like you came out with it through it with grace and resilience, and I applaud you and your colleagues. So thank you so much for sharing this with us in this conference. And yeah, I just wish you all the best. And
Thank you. Thank
And
you. I will say that part of the way I am dealing with all this is by doing presentations like this. We had so little coverage of it nationally that we felt kind of unseen and invisible. So for me and my other colleagues to be able to come and share with other library folks and to find the interest from people and to be able to talk to people who get why this is such a difficult situation for us has been incredibly helpful. So thank you
Yep.
all for the
Yep.
opportunity to
All
share.
right. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, I guess we're going to take a quick break and then we'll have our final session of the day in a few minutes. So I guess maybe we'll be back at 5 past the hour. So thank you again, Joan. Really appreciate it. We'll share the questions and I think we'll be able to share the chat with you as well. I'm not sure Carla would know better how that's going to work. So,
Yes.
all right. All
Thank you.
right. Do you want to stop the recording for the break?